Welcome to the Dispense magazine podcast with news and information about medical cannabis. We talk about the things you and your doctor might talk about. I'm your host, Sven Hosford. In this episode, we visit a recent Dispense with the Nonsense event in Harmony, Pennsylvania. This is part one of a discussion on cannabis and mental health. We'll hear from Dr. John Metcalf and Sara Makin on what is known about treating PTSD, anxiety, and depression with cannabis. Recorded live in front of an audience on September 15th, 2018. Welcome, everybody. We're here at the Center of Harmony, and it really is the center of harmony here. It's been a really harmonious day. We're having such a great time meeting people and getting to know some new folks and watching some really interesting connections being made. So I wanted, first off, to let you know, my name is Sven Hosford. I am the publisher and founder of Dispense magazine, which will be a print magazine starting in the spring now is the current plan. But we're also doing lots of events and podcasts, as you can see, and making connections and basically doing what we can do to educate the public and patients and physicians about medical cannabis. So before we get into the meat of our program here, I want to give us a chance to let a couple people tell us about their organizations. And first we have Josh Meter with the Center of Harmony. So tell us about the center, Josh.
All right. Well, again, thanks for everyone for coming out. My name is Josh Meter. I'm the owner of the Center of Harmony here. I've had the building. It'll be 7 years here in January. And something that occurred to me to see this group and this information getting out today is 7 years ago, this is the mission statement I created for this building. It is, the Center of Harmony is a group of collaborating businesses in an event venue housed in an old opera hall in surrounding building who are focused on preserving the environment, strengthening the community, and empowering people to live happy and healthy lives. This is a place where positive, forward-thinking, and dynamic people come together to grow and thrive. If you would have asked me 7 years ago, could I have imagined a medical cannabis with a serious, legitimate organization taking place in this hall, I'd say it never would have happened. But as we can see, there's been a lot of shifts over the last couple of years, and it's happening rapidly. So just very grateful for Sven for bringing this up, all the amazing people that I've met. And again, thanks for coming out to the Center of Harmony. Check us out online. We always have a lot of great events, a lot of wellness, a lot of fairs, a lot of vendor things up here. So always something happening. And it's great to see so many people, new faces. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Josh. And it really is amazing, too, that you've got all these different things happening in this little town here near Zelienople. So another one of our sponsors is Glass Gone Wow, and we're going to let Ali Buds tell us a little bit about Glass Gone Wow.
Hi, thank you for having us here today. So we are Glass Gone Wow Cranberry. We are one of 7 locations in the Pittsburgh area that provides all of your smoking necessities that you could really run into with medical marijuana. So we have everything from dry herb vaporizers to concentrate vaporizers to full glass rig setups that you can get. We are happy to help you out with every step of the process, from learning what kind of tools to apply your concentrates to your quartz nails to what the difference really is between the different quartz nails that we carry in our shop. We have a full wellness center located in all of our locations with lots of CBD derived from hemp resources. So you don't need a medical marijuana card to get started out with our location. You can come right in, pick up some CBD. We're happy to help you out with that in any way possible. Or really just answer any of those questions that you might be running into that, say, the dispensaries can't answer, or just some more fine details that we really can help you understand a little bit better. So we are Glass Gone Wow Cranberry. We also have one in the North Hills on McKnight Road, Southside, Robinson, Monroeville, Boardman, Ohio, Morgantown, West Virginia, and hopefully one will be coming to Bethel Park soon. There's lots of other plans to open up some new stores. We're really trying to increase the education possibilities for all of our medical patients and make sure you guys are as informed as possible going into this new program.
Thank you so much. That's great. And they really do love to educate brand new patients. So when you walk in there the first time with your with your brand new medical card, you're going to get treated like a king or queen. So let's get into it. Our topic for today is cannabis, terpenes, and mental health. Well, our terpenes guy actually had his wife had a little bit of a medical emergency. So we're just going to keep it focused on mental health. And we've got a great substitute panelist, which I'll tell you about. First, let's introduce Dr. Metcalf. He's been our certifying physician here today. Dr. John Metcalf is a retired internal medicine and functional medicine physician and has a very deep passion for helping to educate people about medical cannabis. Next to me, we have Sara Makin with Makin Wellness, and she is a mental health professional with offices in Pittsburgh and New Ken. And I have to say, you know, in 20 years of doing publishing and working with mental health and all different kinds of healers, she's one of the most amazing mental health therapists I've ever met with and ever worked with. So thank you for that. And then we have Diana Briggs down here on the end. She's holding court, and she is, it's almost hard for me to talk about. When they tell the story of Pennsylvania and how it got legalized, Diana Briggs is one of the people that you're going to be able to thank for that. It was the Campaign for Compassion, who we affectionately dubbed the Mama Bears. Or you guys called yourself the Mama Bears, I think, right?
I think the politicians started it.
Because they pestered those politicians and were in their face and right up in their grill, as they like to say. And it was because of the efforts of Diana and some of the other Mama Bears that we have medical cannabis in Pennsylvania today. So thank you for that. She now runs a program, here. She now runs Pennsylvania Compassionate Caregivers. Did I say that all right?
Yeah.
And which is a volunteer organization for people who don't have access to get out of the house or don't have anybody in their house that can become a caregiver for them. We're going to go over all of that and talk about some of the wonderful mental health aspects of being a caregiver. So let's start with, first let me say too that we have the lovely Becca standing here with a microphone. So anytime you have a question, I want to make this as conversational as possible, as easy as possible. So just give me a signal and we'll send Becca over with the microphone whenever you have a question, okay? So let's start with Dr. Metcalf. You know, there's so many different aspects of healing that goes with cannabis, and one of the things that has been talked about a lot is that it helps with anxiety and depression. And yet, there are some known negative effects that happen with cannabis and mental health. Can you give us an idea of like some of the research and some of the findings that are out there about the different mental health issues around cannabis?
Sure. Let me start out with a logo. Good afternoon, Pittsburgh. It's really an honor to be here today. I appreciate each and every one of you coming out because I think educating you and talking about your questions and giving you some answers, I think is really the focus of why we're here. It is so much more rewarding than just certifying people, even though that it does have a value, but actually talking to people really does bring me back into my element. So now, when it comes to research, as you probably know, is that THC, the psychoactive component of cannabis, and CBD, which is a non-psychoactive, even though that's a debatable issue, are actually a Schedule I drug by the federal government. Schedule I drug means that there is no value or it actually creates harm, kind of like heroin or LSD, which is kind of interesting to me because if you look at the research from 2000 to 2015, they approved 187 drugs, the FDA, and they only required 2 studies, and a third of those only needed 1 study for them to be passed. And you know how many side effects occur as a result of these new drugs that are being passed? Now, just to let you know, if you look at something called PubMed, which is a kind of a Google search engine for medical scientific literature, there's over 28,000 studies on cannabis. There's 4,300 studies on medical cannabis. And so the preponderance of the evidence states the fact is that it should be legalized here in the United States. In fact, if most of you haven't heard, as of the end of July, they've approved a CBD isolate, 99% CBD. It's called Epidiolex. It's from a company called GW Pharmaceuticals over in England, and it just got the FDA passed. It still has to be reclassified from a Schedule 1 to a different classification so it can be sold for childhood seizure disorders. So the laws are changing. Congress is looking at safe access to allow states to have reciprocity. So there's a lot of interesting things, but it's more politics that keeps it out of the mainstream medicine, because currently there's 30 independent state medical boards that have approved medical marijuana, and there's 9 states that have recreational, and 12 have decriminalized it. Now, unfortunately, because it's a Schedule 1 drug, and you cannot patent a plant-based medicine, and the National Institute of Drug Abuse, they limited the amount of research because they thought that their mandate is to only fund studies that showed negative harm from cannabis. So it wasn't until the last couple of years that NIDA has come out and said, you know, maybe there is actually some research to show that cannabis can have a therapeutic effect. Well, that's at least a positive statement, and now more and more studies are being done. The DEA now just authorized a 5-fold increase in getting cannabis to do more research across the country, because most of the research that they've been giving is from the University of Mississippi. And the University of Mississippi has very low quality THC. It's like 1.9%, which is like homeopathic. It has really no particular value. So I have to also comment on the fact is how much I appreciate Dr. Levine in our state to have approved 17 and now 21 conditions. Now, getting back to the original question concerning psychological, there's currently only one condition. That's PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, that has been approved, which is a subvariant of an anxiety disorder. Now, come November, when the board meets again, I'm going to be a proponent of anxiety and depression as being on top of the list, because I think there's well enough research on that it should be passed. And other forms of administration like edibles and smoking, I think those are some other issues that need to be addressed. Recreational, in fact, on September 24th, they're going to have a meeting in Harrisburg to see if they could get some legislation for recreational, but Governor Wolf has already said that he would not endorse it at this point in time. And I can understand that in some ways. There's still a lot that has to be done. 94% of the American public wants medical marijuana, and 60% actually want recreational. So in this state, we have PTSD, and I'll let Sara talk a little bit about that, but let me just quote a little bit of the research that has been done. You know, they've been doing some studies on like anxiety. Did you know 1/3 of all the money in mental health actually goes to treating anxiety disorder? And how medical marijuana works, it works on a certain neurotransmitter in your brain, which is called GABA, which is an inhibitory, in order to help calm you down. And that's what's really important about anxiety that can happen. Now, the opposite of that, if you over-medicate, especially with THC, you might have heard the terms back in the 60s and 70s called getting stoned, and that's, to me, an over-medication. There is processes that you can do to reach the optimal dose, and I'll gladly give you a free website from one of my teachers. That's Dustin Sulak, who actually taught Sanjay Gupta from CNN. So it's a very important website to me. It's www.healer.com. It's free to the public, and this is based upon 18,000 patients that he's treated. Now, there's other research on depression. Currently, there is 3 million people in the United States that have depression, 300 million worldwide. And the latest theory on depression is that it's actually an inflammatory process in the frontal lobes, and it's not a serotonin deficiency where you end up taking SSRIs, that basically after a few months for most people, they need more and more, or they have to change the drugs, because what happens is it starts to become accustomed to you giving replacement, because they're not really dealing with the main factor, which is the endocannabinoid system, which I'll talk about shortly. Other things that have done is like autism. One thing about Pennsylvania, we're one of the few states that has authorized autism to be one of the conditions that it meets for qualifying for medical marijuana. And also, too, innovative in our state, along with 2 other states, is that cannabis can be used as a sole substitute therapy for opiate addiction. In fact, on the 24th, I'll be giving a talk on opiate addiction and pain management, which I think is really important because the crisis is just becoming out of hand. It's being overwhelmed. There's also research, you probably heard of CTE, chronic traumatic encephalopathy, from all of these football players that get hit in the head. In fact, what they've done is they did autopsies on NFL players that have died, and they found that 99% of them had evidence of CTE, which is basically trauma to certain parts of your brain that creates all sorts of psychological changes. So it's real interesting. And now that they've also petitioned the NFL to allow cannabis to be used for their players, but so far that has not passed. But I think as more and more research come down the pipeline, hopefully that will become, because actually they've shown CBD to be a neuroprotective. In fact, did you know that the federal government has a patent? It's called 6630507, and that patent is for CBD and its neuroprotection against brain disorders and brain trauma. I thought that was interesting, especially when the federal government says it has no value and it's a Schedule I drug. That makes no sense whatsoever. One of the biggest things that we see in our office is PTSD, and I'll have Sara talk about that. But interesting about PTSD, it actually changes the wiring in your brain, and cannabis has actually been shown to reformulate those different pathways so that you can start to learn on how to live life again. So.
Dr. Metcalf, let me go back to one point you made and get a little more clarification.
Sure.
You said when people were stoned, or what we call out of it, or whatever terms are used now, whatever the kids are saying, isn't that? Let me ask it another way. Cannabis is known to help cure or treat anxiety and depression, but sometimes it can actually cause that. Now, is that from taking too much medicine, basically, over medication?
Well, that's a very interesting question. It really has to do with the compounds that are actually in the product. There's a guy by the name of Ethan Russo, who is internationally known for cannabis, and he's documented up to 700 compounds in medical marijuana. And so when you go to the dispensary after you're certified, you'll have a consultation with a pharmacist, and they'll kind of walk you through the different products, the different THCs, the psychoactive, and CBD is not so much. What ends up happening is this. It's kind of like a belt-shaped curve that you can take the medicine in low doses, especially microdosing, but when you reach a certain point and you go over it, then you start to develop negative side effects. So that's why it's important to reach an optimal dose before you become over-medicated, and then all of a sudden you can actually have a cannabis use disorder or marijuana, which is kind of like an opiate use disorder. I mean, just for verification. In fact, in this country, they say up to 30% of our population has a marijuana dependency, a use disorder, and that approximately 9% of people have a dependency on cannabis, and up to 17% of children in their teens, if they start cannabis, have a marijuana use disorder. The reason being is that the brain, at the age of 13, the reward centers have been well established, but the other components, like the frontal cortex, where you're reasoning and learning, do not really fully develop until you're 25. So that's one of the reasons why, if you start in your teens, there's a higher probability that you could develop. But the thing that's interesting about cannabis is that even if you become addicted, which I'll talk about, or even dependent upon it, you can stop it. And basically your body rewires itself within a few days to a few weeks, and you can restart the process over. This is not like opiates. Once you're addicted to opiates, that's an entirely different story. Because what opiates do is they completely rewire your brain so that you can't learn, your memory's impaired, and you have impulse disorder. So that's why you're looking at the clock every 6 hours, waiting for your next dose, where CBD has been shown to go into the brain and increase the neural protectiveness, decrease the inflammation, and actually start the neuroplasticity, which is basically neurons connecting with other neurons. So when you start doing psychotherapy along with that, you can start relearning the process, and that's why people can get off addiction issues. So really the addiction issue has to do, or the over-medication, especially THC. If you take too much of that, then you can get paranoid. You can even get bad dreams. You can get very anxious. So that's why you don't start high, you start low, and you go slow. And that website I talked to you about, they actually have a section on dosage that if you click on, it actually walks you through the process to reach the optimal dose based upon how you, internal biomarkers, on how you feel, and how your respiration is. So hopefully I answered your question.
Yes, and just to be clear, on the addiction issue, is it safe to say that cannabis is not physically addictive, but can be mentally addictive isn't the right word, but can be an obsession, much like shopping or sex or
Process addiction. Process addiction.
process addiction?
Yeah. Well, I look at this. When you start talking about addiction, addiction basically is it's a chronic condition where people have learned that they cannot function without that particular drug or compound. Now, what also ends up happening is that when you become addicted, it starts to change certain neurotransmitters. Those are the chemicals that go from one section to the next to allow you to start to learn, memory, how you feel. And what happens with the addiction is it alters those so that your frontal cortex, which is the one that gives judgment, it becomes impaired so that other parts of your brain start to have cravings, and that's where you start to have the addiction and the dependency. A lot of times with cannabis, it's more of a dependence than it is an addiction. But even if you had an addiction, if you wait a few days of stopping it, or up to 4 weeks, you can actually reset different parts of your brain that actually the THC and the CBD work. And when I get into the endocannabinoid system, I'll explain to you in more detail about that.
Excellent, excellent. Well, let's talk a little bit more about PTSD. Let's move on to Sara. First, tell us a little bit about, you're a mental health professional.
Yes.
You do counseling, coaching. What are the most common conditions that you work with?
The most common conditions that we see at Makin Wellness are definitely PTSD, anxiety, depression, various addictions, mostly alcohol addiction, cocaine use disorder.
And what is your definition of trauma?
Trauma is very tricky because it is something that is so subjective. Trauma is something that somebody experiences either directly, they either directly go through it themselves, they observe it, they hear about it happening, and it ends up negatively impacting them, and they feel like they cannot stop thinking about the event, and it's something that continues to show up and manifest in their lives. And the thing with trauma is as long as you perceive it to be a trauma, it is a trauma.
So it's basically, like you said, very subjective. That's why two people can go through the same event and one has PTSD and one does not.
Exactly. It's like if there's a car accident, if there's a head-on-head collision, the one person may get out of their car and be completely fine and they never think about it again, and the other person may be immobilized and they might be psychologically immobilized. They may never drive again because they're so traumatized because of the car accident. So.
And there seems to be a stigma about the idea that you're just not strong enough. You don't have enough willpower to, man up and just get over it. Mm-hmm. Do you see that as a problem, or what's the real reason why one person has such a different reaction?
A lot of times it's what you've experienced throughout your life, and it's really what your perception of the event is. Okay.
So describe a little bit about the kinds of treatments that you do, the non-traditional ones, and then how you incorporate the cannabis into that.
Yeah, so we have evidence-based treatment modalities, mostly cognitive behavioral therapy, which Dr. Metcalf was talking about how cannabis helps to increase neuroplasticity. CBT does as well, and is whenever it's used in conjunction with medical marijuana, patients see amazing results with that. So we do that. We also use something called thought field therapy, which is I guess some may consider it to be a bit of an alternative mode of healing, but essentially what it does is sometimes trauma can whenever someone experiences a trauma, sometimes it can get kind of like stuck in the body, and this helps to release it from the body by tapping on acupuncture pressure points.
Can you talk a little bit more about that? How does trauma, something that's a memory of something we observed, how does trauma get stuck in our body?
Well, in order to get into that, we kind of have to talk about like quantum physics 101. So if every...
Let's do that. Anybody want to talk quantum physics? All right, I have a lot of hands.
Okay, so basically everything in the universe, in the world, is essentially made up of atoms. And so atoms at their core are nothing but energy, just vibrating at a different frequency. So whenever we go through a trauma, and we are in a time where we're operating at such a low frequency, sometimes that low frequency can get like stuck in the body. And what thought field therapy does is it helps to release the energy by using acupuncture pressure, essentially.
And how does cannabis assist with that process?
Cannabis assists with that because whenever people are using their medication, it allows them to kind of open up their minds, be more mindful in the moment, and it helps to kind of alleviate the negative emotions associated with it. Okay.
Does anybody have any questions for either Dr. Metcalf or for Sara so far? Okay, we've got one.
So let me get this straight. Are you recommending your patients use marijuana before therapy?
Oh, no. No. So they don't smoke in our office or anything like that.
That's actually a very good question.
Yeah, that is a great question.
You don't actually sell it in your office.
No, we do not.
There's no vending machine there, Sam.
No.
So,
No. So basically, all of our PTSD treatment and opioid use disorder treatment uses medical marijuana. So we refer our clients and we suggest for the medicinal marijuana to be used in conjunction with the treatment, and then they medicate at home or wherever they choose to medicate. It's a great question, though.
Yeah, we should say, too, that you're not a certifying physician.
No.
Because you're not a medical doctor.
No.
But you can give the diagnosis, which then you take to a doctor like Dr. Metcalf,
Yes.
and that's how you get your card.
Yes.
So it's a two-step process if they've never been diagnosed with PTSD before.
Yes.
Okay, great.
I just might interject something.
Sure.
If you want to know the physiology of how it affects it, is that I've noticed that cannabis reconnects you with yourself instead of the outside world. So it allows you to start spending time trying to figure out what are the issues in your life instead of being so distracted by the stressful world that we live in. Because what happens with PTSD and stress, there's a certain structure in the limbic system called the amygdala. The amygdala is a place where fear and emotional trauma get stored. And what happens is every time that trigger is accentuated, the amygdala starts to grow more and more. As a result of that, other parts of your brain, which is the hippocampus, which is the memory center, and the frontal cortex, which is your judgment, they become downregulated. So basically, by taking cannabis, it actually changes the structure of your brain in those particular areas to allow you to reconnect to yourself and start to deal with the stressful condition. And that's how the physiology works for that. Yeah.
Hi. Are there any studies showing interactions between meditative practices and marijuana?
Yes, absolutely. You know, there's something called lifestyle changes, which I say to every patient, is that if you don't make lifestyle changes, you can take cannabis all you want. It's just treating a different herb for a problem that you have. And when I say lifestyle changes, I'm talking about stress reduction, exercises, foods, supplements, meditation. Very important too is fasting, especially 16 hours. Because what fasting does, it's 16 hours, it actually starts to break down the cell's waste products, allows the body to recycle them, and allows them to start reworking themselves, because it's when the waste products accumulate in the cell, that's when you start having especially neurodegenerative disorders like Parkinson or Alzheimer's. So this is a process that can actually help reverse that, or at least minimize it. So lifestyle changes are extremely important, along with cannabis and a healthy lifestyle. Because if you don't change your life, then the whole reason why you developed the problem hasn't gone away. And that, what happens is it affects the endocannabinoid system, which I'll talk about shortly, and how that dysregulates that and how it affects your whole body and your lifestyle.
Did that answer your question, Rich?
Yes.
Great.
Okay.
Thank
great,
you.
Great. Larry.
Hello, my name's Larry. I got here late, so I didn't know if you guys had spoke about what you do before or anything. But with yourself, Dr. John, a lot of the things that you were talking about, the side effects of overuse, too much, you know, I mean, I hit on those, because I've been smoking marijuana for almost 50 years. So, and a lot of it I was doing, you know, I was using it medically, but I didn't even understand the fact that I was using it medically. I just knew that I just liked what was going on, but sometimes I had no idea how to regulate what I used, or you had access to, you know, specific terpenes and the amount of THC in it and everything. So oftentimes, you know, a lot of times I was often more high than what I really wanted to be. But I learned, you know, you can become psychologically addicted, as you said, and I became very used to functioning that way.
Well, one of the biggest problems is that THC, the psychoactive component, actually in 1990, the THC component was 3.8% THC, and in 2014, it is now 12.8%. So that is a lot of times the reason that sometimes people can a dependency or an addiction. Plus, if you buy concentrates, they can be up to anywhere between 50 and 80% THC. So you have to be aware that that's also one of the reasons why people have a higher percentage, perhaps, of getting dependent or addiction. And that's why my motto is to start low and go slow, because in essence, you want to reach the optimal dose, and you don't want to get stoned or over-medicated, because then you've gone beyond the point, and now you can actually have detrimental side effects from that.
So my question to you is...
Sure.
That was just a warm-up.
Yeah. Do you treat people? I mean, do you take clients and see people and, you know, say, hey, this is, you know, for, you know, like for me, this is what you need. You should try this for all the things I have.
Well, let me say this. I'm an internist by training. 2 years ago, I retired from occupational medicine because it was a negative experience for my spirit. And I started developing a medical condition that I knew that traditional medicine was not going to take care of. So that's what took me along the journey of functional medicine, functional neurology and immunology, and also to medical marijuana, especially with hyperkinetic or autistic kids, that tends to calm them down. So I've devoted myself at this point to certifying people. I don't do the functional medicine anymore. And I also go out and lecture people, because I think there's a real need to go out and start educating people about the process, because there's just too many of my colleagues that have taken a 4-hour mandated course by the state, and honestly, it doesn't really teach you a lot. And so I've spent the last year of my life basically researching and medical cannabis, and that's my true passion. So I hope I answered your question. I tend to be very verbose and not short.
And I just wanted to introduce Kayla to you all. She's a therapy dog, and she's actually she's a Hungarian hemp hound. That's a relatively new breed.
Well, you know what, actually, Larry, your question actually made me think of, does anybody on the panel know of a doctor who will work specifically with helping you adjust your cannabis intake, or to merge more fully the cannabis? I mean, you do it on the mental level, Sarah, but on a physical level with more of the physical conditions. Dr. Metcalf, do you know of anyone?
No. The bottom line is that most physicians, after the 4-hour course, will certify you. And when you ask them, well, what about the different strains? They'll say, you go to the dispensary, and the pharmacist there will take care of you, and you have a nice day. Unfortunately, I find an ethical issue on that because I think the physician, even though you can't prescribe it by federal law, you recommend it, you should be aware of what's in it and how to help the patient. So I try to give them some general guidelines because remember, each dispensary has different products because there's now 8 growers in the state on phase 1, and they all have different products, different compounds. So when you see the pharmacist, you go in, write down your symptoms and your diagnosis, and they'll work with you based upon the 3 major categories that is in cannabis, which is the phytocannabinoids, which I'll talk about shortly, the terpenes, which is flavor and aroma, and the third one is called cannaflavin, which is your antioxidants, which actually help decrease inflammation in your body. And I won't bore you with the details of that.
That concludes part 1 of Cannabis and Mental Health. Join us again next time for part 2, when we'll talk to Diana Heilman-Briggs of Pennsylvania Compassionate Caregivers. Thanks to our sponsors, Glass Gone Wow, Soliva Wellness, PA Compassionate Caregivers, Makin Wellness, and our host, the Center of Harmony. Thanks for listening. This podcast is a production of Mindful Medicine, LLC.